Okay. I'm going to ask everybody to go on to mute apart from, can everybody mute themselves apart from Ellen? That would be awesome. Actually, if I just do mute all here and then Ellen, you're going to have to unmute yourself. Okay, so welcome everybody. We It's nice to see you all. This is another well, we usually do seminars on psychedelic safety. This time we're looking at a cult, which is OneTaste, and we're lucky to have Ellen Huet joining us to speak about her new book about OneTaste, the orgasm cult. Ellen studied English and political science at Stanford. Then you worked at the San Francisco Chronicle,
That's right.
a newspaper which I know from the Zodiac movie because it broke
Oh yeah.
the Zodiac killer.
They actually even shot some scenes of the Zodiac movie with the one with Jake Gyllenhaal that came out in like the, I don't
Yeah,
know, late
brilliant movie.
2000s.
David
They
Fincher.
shot Yeah, they shot some of those scenes in the San Francisco Chronicle newsroom. That's like a fun fact about the newsroom
Yeah.
that we always love.
So a great place for a budding cult reporter to work at. Then you joined Bloomberg, and 3 years after you joined, you broke the One Taste story, or at least broke the story that there were some darker aspects to this very successful wellness movement. So since that story came out in 2018, you've also done a podcast on WeWork called Foundering, which won various awards. And this is Ellen's first book, I believe, Empire of Orgasm, which has just come out. So thank you for joining us, Ellen.
Ta-da!
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and thank you on Substack if people are joining us there. So, Ellen, could you give us just, I think most of us have some familiarity. Okay, so for most of us are familiar with the One Taste story, but can you just give us a kind of high level overview? What was One Taste? What's happened to it? And how were you involved in the story?
Sure. OneTaste is a company that was founded in San Francisco in 2004 by a woman named Nicole Daedone. And what they were doing was they were a sexual wellness startup of sorts, selling education courses on their central practice, which was called orgasmic meditation. Orgasmic meditation is a 15-minute partnered clitoral stroking mindfulness practice in which the stroker, usually a man, puts on a glove and some lube on his left index finger and then strokes the clitoris of a woman for 15 minutes in a very prescribed manner.
Mhm.
Sorry, now we're getting a delayed set. Let me just look at the chat. Second audio track.
All right, I think we're going to have to end the Substack, guys. Sorry about that. But I will share the recording to my Substack readers. So bye to
Sorry,
Substack.
guys.
Sorry, guys.
Yeah, I think yeah, Katie says it's
All right.
Jules' speakers. Sorry.
Okay.
Sorry,
That
guys.
was the first time we've done that. We probably should have prepared that. Anyway, first try.
All good. Yeah. Well,
Okay, so
to the Zoom people,
yeah. Mhm.
I'll continue. So basically, yeah, orgasmic meditation, this is like the central practice of One Taste, and it's a 15-minute partnered clitoral stroking mindfulness practice. Yeah, in which a man strokes a woman's clitoris in a very prescribed manner for 15 minutes. And the only goal of those 15 minutes is to have both parties reflect on and meditate on the sensations in their bodies. And One Taste, this was like their main practice. This is what they sold courses on. And they promised that a regular own practice would have all these benefits. So, if you're at all familiar with the wellness industry, some of these might sound familiar, but basically like better sex, better relationships, better connection and intimacy in your life, as well as more vitality, more energy, more connection with your desire and your intuition. It started from pretty like sex focused promises to all the way like the idea of yeah, just kind of like a better life and even a better spiritual connection to something divine.
Mhm.
And Nicole Daedone was really like the visionary of this company. She's the founder. She's the woman at the top. She's the main character of the book. And she really pushed to make One Taste this mainstream business. And they ended up actually getting for a pretty confronting practice, they managed to get pretty mainstream. Like they were endorsed by Tim Ferriss, Khloe Kardashian, Gwyneth Paltrow, like the ultimate wellness endorsement. Nicole
Hmm.
spoke on stage at Gwyneth Paltrow's health conference in 2017. All of this, and um, the way to think about One Taste is essentially that there was this like outward facing business in which they were selling this kind of glossy wellness practice that was like a little spiritual, a little wellness oriented. And then for those who got very involved in the company, there was a somewhat different experience behind the scenes in which it wasn't just a place where you took classes, it became your whole community, your whole life. People would leave their previous jobs and start working for the One Taste sales team, move out of their homes and move into communal homes with other One Taste people. And then, just gradually distance themselves from their previous lives and get more enmeshed in the company.
Hmm.
And within that community, there was like a different sort of lifestyle in which, people were encouraged to do like pretty extreme acts as a pursuit of spiritual and sexual enlightenment, which we can get more into. But
Mm.
that's kind of where, um, that's a little bit where I came into the picture. Like in 2017, One Taste, I'm a journalist. I was working at Bloomberg News. I was covering startups. And in 2017, One Taste's PR consultant pitched me on writing a story about them, which I think they imagined would be pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
And when I and when I started looking into it, I discovered that there were people who felt that their experience with One Taste had actually been quite damaging and predatory. And those were people who had been involved a little bit more deeply. And I
Mm.
ended up speaking to, over a dozen people who had experiences like this and writing this investigative article about these allegations that the group was exploitative, that it was like a dangerous cult, and that they had exploited their members both financially by pressuring them to take on debt in order to buy increasingly expensive courses, some of which would cost over $30,000, and sexually by pressuring them to have sex with potential customers or with their coworkers as part of keeping the business going.
Mm.
So all of that, that piece came out in 2018. And
Mm.
although I don't know for sure, it in all likelihood kicked off an FBI investigation, which um, started like around the same time, and which, after many years of investigating, the federal government eventually charged Nicole, the leader, and Rachel, her second in command, Rachel Sherwitz, with a federal crime, forced labor conspiracy, which we can get into the details of that and what exactly it means later if you like. Um, and then that led to like 2 years of pretrial motions. And then in 2025, this summer in New York, there was a criminal trial for both Nicole and Rachel,
Hmm.
lasted about 5 or 6 weeks. And at the end, a jury unanimously decided to convict both of them of this crime. And so the two women are now actually in a federal jail awaiting sentencing, which could come later this year or
Uh-huh.
early next.
So they don't know yet how long they'll be in prison.
They don't know. It could be up to 20 years.
Wow.
It's TBD.
So one of the things I loved in the book was a quote from Steve Hassan, the cult expert, who said, "We're in the golden era of female cult leaders. They all used to be kind of, in the 50s and 60s and 70s, more typically men, and now there seems to be more female ones, like the what is it, Let Love Win, or
Yeah.
a few." So tell us about the woman who invented this organization and seemed to be very alluring and charismatic, Nicole Daedone. What do you know about her origin, her personality, and her motivations?
Totally. Nicole's a fascinating person. She is really, when I approached this reporting project, I understood she would be the main character of the book. Anyone who talks about One Taste, it is clear that she is like the leader, the inspiration, the visionary. And she is now in her late 50s. She grew up in the Bay Area in the 70s, and she had a very tough childhood. She grew up with a single mother and wishing to be closer to her father, who was kind of a distant figure, had other children, other spouses in the course of his life. And what's most important about her father, Joseph Daedone, is that he was a convicted child sex abuser, and he had actually been incarcerated twice in his lifetime. for crimes of this type. Once when Nicole was very young, when she was under 10 years old, and again when she was in her 20s. And he actually died in custody when she was in her late 20s, before he was ever like convicted of the second set of sex abuse charges. And what's important to know is that, Nicole has spoken at various points in her career about how her father's dark relationship with sexuality has inspired her to want to show that sexuality can also heal with as much power as it could harm. But she has often sidestepped the question of whether he ever abused her directly. And that was something that I did try to answer in the book. And I do try to treat it with a lot of care. It's obviously a very sensitive subject.
Mm,
But I did find people who told me that when Nicole was like in her 20s or as a young adult, that she had told them that her father had sexually abused her when she was a child. And I think this is important because it's, I think it's just hard to overstate how much of an effect that can have on someone. And unfortunately, how common it is, right? Like this is not an unusual thing.
mm,
And I, I wanted readers to be able to understand that there might be like a really deep-seated reason that this woman wanted to devote herself to um, understanding her sexuality, understanding kind of like all sides of sexuality, and then also to understand it from a point of view without much of a like moral black or white. And this will come up later. Like she will later on say things about her father, like, "Oh, I never took on the idea that he was a bad person.
mm,
I just thought that he was too expansive for the third dimension, and that on the fourth dimension he was like, this like wonderful being."
mm,
I think that's really complicated. And I trust readers to be smart enough to like think about it on their own and come to their own conclusions. But that is definitely like a big and important part of her childhood. Moving on to like her early 20s, she ended up having, or throughout her 20s, she ended up having kind of like unusual string of experiences. Like she ran an art gallery, she dabbled in graduate school, but then she also, according to people who knew her at the time, uh, did a lot of meth, took, in her own words, copious amounts of LSD. She even talks about, it's unclear to me how true it is, but has talked about spending years of her 20s in a quote unquote acid house, in which this was like their main pursuit was like trying to, I think, stretch the bounds of their consciousness and their understanding of reality through psychedelics.
mhm,
And she also dabbled in sex work. She has talked about, in her own words, being an escort and a stripper. And then in her late 20s, she has an experience in which she meets someone who introduces her to um, a version of orgasmic meditation. It
mhm,
basically, she stumbles upon this world in which there are these two pre-existing groups that are based in the Bay Area that are also at various points alleged to be sex cults or something like it, that teach a practice called deliberate orgasm, which is also a meditative, mindful clitoral stroking practice.
What are they called
And
again? Like the welcomed consensus or something?
yes. So
Yeah.
one of them, the original one is a group called Morehouse, which started in the late 60s in Lafayette, which if you guys are
Mhm,
familiar with the Bay Area, it's east of Berkeley. And that one was kind of like the bigger one. That was, they actually had more houses all around the country. Those still exist today. They have this fun pattern of painting their houses purple and calling themselves the Purple People.
mhm,
Or actually, maybe other people called them the Purple People. But, they liked to live life differently. They used terms like responsible hedonism, definitely like a quirky um, culture for those who want to read about it. And another group that has been alleged to like have done some harmful things to its members, that kind of thing. So that's where the practice originates. And then there's this spin-off group of like one of their ex-students spins off his own project and he calls it the Welcomed Consensus.
mhm,
But they are doing a similar thing. Again, their central practice is deliberate orgasm. They sell courses on this practice. That's how they make money.
mm,
And there's lots of this internal terminology that you'll see pop up later in OneTaste, like they refer to their potential recruits and customers as marks, kind of like for fun, but also like,
mm,
you know, jokingly referring to a real dynamic that's going on.
mm,
And yeah, this is kind of where Nicole gets her training.
mhm,
She gets this firsthand experience of seeing that you can run a community where you sell this practice, that you could have people living together because both of these groups involved communal living.
Mm.
And then at some point, she decides she'd like to do this on her own and she would like to be the
Yeah.
one running her own thing. And especially, most importantly, she makes a few changes that I think set her up well for mainstream success, which is she makes herself the leader, a woman, much more palatable to the public. People want to have this assumption that they're going to trust her. It's more gentle, it's more trustworthy. She calls it orgasmic meditation, which again makes it a lot more spiritual. It's a practice. OM is the abbreviation for orgasmic meditation, which they like to call Om, which again evokes kind of this like mantra that you might hear in a yoga class. And then she decides to really make it a business. Like it is much more oriented like a startup. They are based in San Francisco. They really try to like expand quickly. And I think that is also helpful given that we're about to enter, around this time, it's like the mid 2000s, we're about to enter this like decade and a half long startup boom that is going to like lift all boats, right? And so um, that's kind of how she gets the idea to start OneTaste, the business.
What were the good things that that people got from it? Um, uh, Obviously, people stuck around for a long time. People gave fortunes to this. Hard to encapsulate, but can you try to encapsulate what is the good stuff that people got from One Taste?
Absolutely. Orgasmic meditation as a practice
Mhm.
has a lot to offer. And there are very deep reasons that people were drawn to it and reasons that even if they don't appeal to you directly, I think you can sympathize with. So the way that orgasmic meditation is set up is specifically focused on female pleasure. And it also has a couple key requirements. One of them is that there's really no goal. Like it is supposed to be goalless. Again, there's no pressure to try to like reach climax or have any sort of outcome or perform in any certain way. The only goal is for both parties to like feel and reflect on the sensations in their bodies. Second, there's no reciprocation. So for women who are receiving this sexual pleasure from a partner, they are specifically told, and it's emphasized, like you don't owe the partner anything, not a handshake, a hug, your phone number, more sex, anything like that. And so for a lot of people, especially women who have maybe experienced a lifetime of social conditioning, men too, like that if someone gives you sexual pleasure, you kind of feel like, okay, well, I owe you something. Like, do I need to make you feel good? Do we need to like do something? It can be quite freeing to feel like, okay, actually, your only job is to receive. And so for a lot of people, that was like emotionally and psychologically like powerful experience. And then for anyone who has experienced performance anxiety during sex, or for the approximately 10 to 15% of American women who struggle to have an orgasm, the idea of goallessness can be quite freeing as well. Um, and then, for anyone who is in a long relationship where maybe the physical spark is no longer there, or you're looking for answers on how to connect intimately with partners, the whole pitch of orgasmic meditation is quite compelling. And you know, in all my research, it's like many people I spoke to had complicated feelings about OneTaste, the company, and the culture of this, but even those who felt like OneTaste was damaging and hurtful and like toxic would say to me, like, I'm sad that orgasmic meditation, the practice, didn't get really a chance to live separate from the company because they do still often feel like there's a lot of promise to that practice. So that is, I think, what brought people in. And something to remember about cults in general is that any cult that is like somewhat successful is going to have something at the center of it that is quite valuable because otherwise, like, it's just not going to get off the ground.
Yeah.
And in this case, that's what they were offering. This thing that I believe, I have no reason to believe that it wasn't, some of its promises may have been overstated, but in general, people talk to me about transformative experiences they had while doing this practice. And I think with any sort of sitting meditation, of course, if you dedicate time to regularly sitting and noticing the feelings in your body, like there are benefits that are going to come from
Mhm.
that. And so this is just like a more sexualized version of it, but you can imagine a lot of the benefits of sitting meditation that would come through having a regular practice like this as well. And so I think just remembering that, like, yeah, people want community, they want a sense of belonging, they want a sense of purpose. Like for those who joined OneTaste and became really wrapped up in it, what it often felt like at first was really fun. It was like you found these amazing new friends, you have this cool mission in which people are going to like heal the world through orgasm and orgasmic meditation, and like you're living in this exciting inner circle where everyone's doing all these sexual experiments with each other. You feel like you're getting personal growth. So for a
Mm,
lot of people, it was both this sense of mission as well as a sense of like personal transformation, which of course was also very popular during that time and continues to be, like Landmark, Tony Robbins. Um, all of these things promise the allure of personal breakthroughs as well.
mm.
If you follow the practice, if you follow the philosophies of the group, that's part of the promise of what you get. And so for a lot of people, again, people told me about these mixed experiences they had at OneTaste where they were like, it was very damaging in such and such way. And at the same time, I feel like my life changed in these other ways, that I discovered these things about myself that I'm never going to forget.
Nicole told people, according to your book, that if they left One Taste, they would never really find the same meaning or excitement. They would be lost. And people you interviewed said that was kind of true, at least for a while. Life after One Taste felt like pallid, pulseless, two-dimensional. And it made me think about why sometimes people stay in cults or come back to them, is because even the trauma can, I suppose, become, addictive, or the kind of, just the drama. And whatever it was not boring. It was always
Yes.
exciting and an extreme. And maybe people's nervous systems got used to those extremes. And it reminds me of soldiers going back to war zones, or war reporters kind of compulsively, because they can't handle the quietness of normal life, or maybe also the lack of that intense connection.
I totally agree. And I think that, yeah, for anyone who sees those patterns, I think like those patterns are very human. For the first part, what I'll say is, yeah, Nicole did suggest in her teachings, and I think her leaders and her subordinates suggested the same thing, which was, yes, that if you got into OneTaste and you really started going down this path, that if you left the path, you would feel this permanent loss. You would feel a sense of like having abandoned the path. There was even this one very telling moment in which Nicole was lecturing to a course of students, and she was talking about the origins of the name One Taste. She
Mm,
said, everyone knows or not everyone, I'll explain what they say the name of One Taste comes from a Buddhist saying, which is something like, just as the ocean has one taste, the taste of salt, so too does the truth have one taste, the taste of liberation, something like that.
mm,
And forgive me if I got some of those slips. So there's a Buddhist saying that's where one taste comes from. That's like where the name comes from. However, in this one lecture, Nicole was saying to her students, you know, this is why we call it one taste, because once you get one taste of like this experience of what it's like to be um, having like this intense of an experience, um, your soul will never be the same again, basically. And she essentially says like some part of you is always going to become crawling back. And that is where I think, you know, savvy listeners should see a red flag, because of course there are a lot of people out there, many of your listeners and readers know this, who are promising like, hey, I have found a solution and I think it's going to help your life. I don't think that there's anything inherently wrong with that. Like some people have a transformative experience and they want to share it with people. However, if they start to tell you this is the only way, and if you don't do it my way, like you will you will suffer spiritually, like on another plane, I think that's a huge red flag. And I don't think anyone should take that lightly. Like I think to me that starts to get into an area of wanting to control rather than wanting to help.
yeah,
And so that's one thing, is like you should just beware if someone suggests that, like, yeah, if you leave their path, you're going to suffer. Um, but
yeah.
what's true is, yes, at the same time, like people who left One Taste struggled to adjust to life outside of it. And there's also an interesting anecdote that I think illustrates this in the book. There's the story of a woman named Audrey who like left One Taste, not on great terms. Like she was like, "You guys are damaging. I need to go." She like kind of quit and left. And then outside, she was like struggling to adjust to this sort of like normal world. One Taste is a place where people are kind of like emotionally aggressive with each other. You're often saying confronting things to each other because that's kind of like how the orgasm is supposed to lead you. And so she would like get into fights with her roommates. She like got kicked out of places that she lived in. And then there's this one scene in which her car gets towed and she doesn't have the money to pay the impound fee. And so she goes into the lot and just tries to drive her car out of the lot, can't leave, rams her car into a fence. Like the parking attendant, is like yelling at her. She ends up getting arrested. And later when she's reflecting on this to me, she was like, "Oh, I think I just thought that I could get away with it." Like within One Taste, they lived this life where, they kind of had these like grandiose ideas about themselves. And she recognized that she like missed the thrill
Yeah.
and the craziness of life inside.
And I
Yeah,
suppose,
many former.
I mean, our attraction to cults says something about cults, but it says something about society outside of these cults as well, that it is often there. We lack often connection. We lack meaning.
Yeah.
We lack that kind of,
Connection, excitement. Like one
yeah,
person described life in One Taste to me as though you're living in the world's most exciting reality show. It's like you're not even just watching it, you're in it.
yeah.
And and yeah, your life is full of it feels like more happens in a year inside One Taste than in like 10 years outside. You miss people did miss it. And Audrey, in fact, the woman who ran her car into the fence, also said that she and her roommate outside of One Taste, who had was also a former One Taste member, used to joke about like, so should we like start our own cult? Like because we're kind of like bored and lonely
Yeah.
outside of it. And there's a temptation to want to go back to get that excitement.
Well, I've met people who were in one cult and then in another one, and they kind of were searching for that thing. Um,
Exactly.
so one of the wildest bits in the book is when you're talking about that one of their donors, and they kind of had one or two high net worth donors who bankrolled them. The guy called Reese Jones, and he was treated like royalty, and they would even put on these elaborate, multi-person cast theatrical events for him for his birthday, pageants almost like he was King Henry in the Elizabethan era. Could you tell us a little bit about that briefly?
Totally. So in the early years of One Taste, um, the company was struggling financially. They were selling courses, but it was not enough to pay for rent and the other expenses that they had. And one of the ways that they stayed afloat was that Nicole met and befriended and actually started dating this Silicon Valley investor named Reese Jones. This is someone who had made his money in the early 2000s by selling a company to like Motorola. And he was an investor and he was interested in like, he was involved in Singularity University. He was interested in sort of esoteric science topics as well as sex and One Taste. And so he ended up getting involved. He started bankrolling some of One Taste's expenses. He would loan the company money. He paid for certain, he bought the company like computers and things like that. And according to many people I spoke to, as well as court testimony, the way in which he was repaid was through sexual favors by One Taste employees. And these sexual favors took form in two major categories. The first one were these, as you mentioned, elaborate scenes, is what they called them, that were put on usually for Reese's birthday or for special occasions. And a scene involved sometimes multiple days of these planned out, immersive theatrical experiences in which they were really catering to an audience of one, Reese. And they would put on, so this involved like a dozen or more One Taste employees would plan um
That was one like the seven
basically
deadly sins, right?
yes, that yeah, one of them was
Each
themed
room in the
after
building would be like lust or gluttony and
exactly.
kind of sexual
Yeah,
experience.
they were
I mean,
yes. So the scenes were largely sexual and they were themed after one example is the Seven Deadly Sins, another is the Wizard of Oz. And it would involve, yes, One Taste employees doing various, you know, theatrical and or sexual experiences for Reese. And that was one of the ways that they gave him attention as like a thank you or a reward for his financial support. And
Hmm.
then the other one, again, according to court testimony, was that Nicole asked various female One Taste employees to serve as Reese's handlers. So
Hmm.
this meant something like living in his home, which was a sort of a mansion in Russian Hill in San Francisco, taking care of his dog, helping with household chores, maybe doing like some grocery shopping or cooking, and sexually servicing him in some form every day. So
Hmm.
people have testified that that usually involved like a hand job or some other sexual act.
Hmm.
And what's interesting about this is that it was really positioned as a role of honor. Like if you were asked to do this, that it was seen as a way to be part of Nicole's inner circle, that it was really seen as this like elevated task that you could choose to take on in order to support the company.
Hmm.
And there are some women who served in this role who are still quite devoted to One Taste. And as far as I can tell, do not believe that this was an exploitative arrangement. And then there are others, including those who testified at trial, who feel that this was quite exploitative and that they were not really given room to say no, or that all the, the teachings of One Taste really like primed them to say yes to this thing that actually they did not want to do. And that's where it gets really complicated. One of the main questions that came up at trial was, what does it mean to say
Consent.
yes to something, but to have it be under this like pretty extreme social pressure and
Right.
psychological pressure of a group like this. And yeah, consent is a complicated thing in a
Yeah.
scenario like this. And there was one witness who said something like, well, if you can't freely say no, then you can't freely say yes, and then it's not consent. But of course, not, I think that's like a question that we haven't really like come to a firm conclusion on because it's not black or white.
Yeah, I mean, it's a long question going back to the 50s over whether there's such a thing as brainwashing, whether people can be made to do things against their consent. To what extent do people have responsibility and can they be held responsible? Both, the prisoners of war in North Korean kind of camps and then in these cults or people like Patty Hearst and so on. And, I mean, what do you think? Because I suppose people in cults, there's a part of them that, and this was their defense, One Taste defense, that wants it, that chooses it, that says, I want
Yeah.
this. I know it's extreme, but that's what I want. And then also they're complicit. They're bringing other people, they're recruiting people. So
Yeah.
it is complicated, isn't it? And one thing I also wondered is why did they accuse just Nicole and Rachel? Why does the buck stop there in a way like everyone was part of this?
Yeah. Well, yeah, the why were Nicole and Rachel the only you know, indicted defendants? That's probably something that the prosecutors have insight into that I, you know, don't. But I'm sure that they thought a lot about who would or wouldn't be included in that category. And yes, within One Taste, there were mid-level former One Taste members who talked to me about reflecting on how they both felt like they were simultaneously victims and villains within this story, that they had been, that they would tell me that they felt like they'd been exploited by those above them. And they could also recognize in them all the times that they had done that to other people, that they had manipulated one of their coaching clients to buying a course, into buying a course by using like intimate information that the client had shared with them in a different setting, to try to like turn that screw and get this person to pay $5,000 for a course. Like they recognized the ways in which they had perpetuated the harm within One Taste. And I think that that's like a really nuanced thing about life in this group is like many people played both of those roles. And zooming out, what's more interesting, this question of, was this person responsible for it? Did they want it? Did they choose it? One of the, what's interesting about that question of did they choose it is that within One Taste, one of the prevailing philosophies was this idea that taking on a victim mentality or a victim mindset was seen as weak, as lesser. And you were taught things like you need to be like fully responsible for your experience, and that to think of yourself as a victim is a signal that you're not doing that, and it was quite denigrated within the group and socially very disapproved of. And this is not unique to OneTaste. And in fact, one of the things that I love doing in my research is finding how many other groups have some version of this idea that you need to be like radically responsible for your entire experience. You'll see
Oh
it
yeah.
in Landmark, you'll see it in Tony Robbins. In fact, I even saw it the other day in a
Course
story
for
about,
Miracles. Is
yes.
Course for
And I saw it the other day in a story about the Free Birth Society, which is this like somewhat fringe group of women who advocate for birth with no medical intervention. And they were telling the women in this group, you need to take radical 100% responsibility for all outcomes of your free birth, including your baby's death and your own death, should that come to pass. And of course, there is value in the idea of teaching someone to reframe their life where they feel like they have more agency over where it is now and their choices going forward. And at the same time, if you take it all the way to the end conclusion, what you're really saying is there is no possible way that someone could hurt you or be at fault for any bad thing in your life because like it's all basically on you. It's very like individualistic and it's very like it's a way to basically say, we couldn't possibly be a perpetrator because there are no victims. So it's if you feel bad, it's your fault. And I think it can be used really strongly to gaslight people into thinking that, um, they haven't been harmed and that they couldn't possibly be a victim. And so for many of the people who were in OneTaste, when they left the group, one of the hardest things that they had to think through and process psychologically was coming to terms with this question of like, well, should I actually consider myself a victim now that I'm looking at this experience that I've had and I see that maybe my new framework is that these people were taking advantage of me. It is still really hard for them to say I was a victim of this because it was drilled into their head so many times that that would be small-minded and like weak and like not spiritually evolved.
Yeah.
And it just leads it to be very complicated. So that's another way that this question of agency was blurry and difficult to
Yeah.
come to any sort of answer on.
Yeah. People, if you'd like to put some questions in the chat as well, by the way, I've got a few more, but I want to leave some time, like 15 minutes for any of your questions as well. Um, So, I think of One Taste in a way, it's a bit in the tradition of human potential, self-empowerment groups that offer these courses. And I think about, the founders of the human potential movement, people like Aldous Huxley or Abraham Maslow. They could have never dreamt that it would just turn into these organizations that are basically extreme sales organizations, like things like One Taste, Landmark, Nixium. They take the philosophy of human liberation and just turn it into like, sales, like extreme sales machines,
Yeah.
where the members of the organization have to sell, 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 just get as much money as they can from people. And then there's pyramid schemes as well. And that's what they ultimately got done for. Am I right that it was these extreme sales tactics?
That's part of it, but it's not the whole thing. You're right that I think many of these groups end up offering these increasingly expensive layers of courses because that's part of how you keep someone like continually feeling like they need to dedicate more to this group in order to get the promise.
Yeah,
And so I think that that's like a natural outcropping of, like there's a reason people call cults high demand groups is because they demand a lot of their members, whether that's time, energy, resources, relationships, or money. So you have to kind of keep offering something bigger for people to go to.
yeah,
And then and then I think like, what ended up being the claim or the charge for OneTaste is forced labor conspiracy, which basically just means conspiracy means one or more people conspiring to do an unlawful thing, and the unlawful thing in question is forced labor, which is essentially like, are you obtaining someone's labor using unlawful means, which are quite broadly defined. It could be, in this case they focused on the definition that included serious harm or threats of serious harm, and serious harm could be defined not only as physical but also psychological, financial, reputational, and otherwise. And so in this case they were arguing that there were certain instances in which serious harm had happened, like there were alleged accounts of moments of like sexual abuse within the group, and then threats of serious harm. They were basically saying there were the threats of like spiritual harm in which people felt like if they left the group that they would be ruined in some way or shunned and ostracized. And so it wasn't necessarily about the financial aspect, but they did have to focus on some of the labor that was obtained from these people, which was both sexual and non-sexual, in
Hmm.
order to show like the forced labor part.
Okay. So these kinds of new spiritual or wellness movements, culty or otherwise, need to find ways to validate their fringe treatments, whether that's cold bathing or whatever.
Yeah.
And the ways they do that, I guess, are celebrity endorsements, and also if they can find scientists to do a study of their thing, that's absolute gold dust. And I came across the Institute, which was maybe what they called themselves for a bit, One Taste. And they managed to get some quite senior figures in the world of spiritual science research to give talks or videos talking about or even to work with them, like Andrew Newberg, Roland Griffiths, he's there on the homepage. Um, I contacted one of the researchers because I wanted to write about this, and I asked them, did they feel there was a risk they were laundering this harmful cult? Were they involved in One Taste? And they reacted so aggressively. They threatened me with defamation just for asking these questions. Then they emailed all my the funders of my NGO and threatened them. They said they were going to sue them as well, and it was so aggressive. I was like, wow, and actually it worked. I was like, this is this is. So I wondered, like, you know, are there things that researchers have to be careful about with some of these fringe groups? Like, how can they spot the signs that this could be a toxic cult? Why could you see that and so many others couldn't see that?
I mean, I don't think that I had some sort of like special insight. Like I think what I had was the the time and resources to dedicate and I'm very grateful to my to Bloomberg News for helping support like the original investigation into
Mm,
this group because I did I probably spent 6 or 7 months on that. Not every journalist has the resources, the time, and the like wherewithal to be able to like dedicate that much time and energy to that story. I mean, I was doing other things at the time, but it was really like a major project for many months. So,
mm,
thank you to my managers and editors and to that newsroom. So I think that like often when you have time and resources, you can turn over many stones and find something. And a lot of people are just pressed for time. So I never like judge them for not seeing something. When it comes to scientific validation, that's definitely something that OneTaste has gone after in the last few years. Yes, they're called OneTaste, but they also sometimes call themselves the Eros platform, and then for a while the Institute of Om, and then they also have the Institute of Om Foundation, I believe, which was supporting certain scientific studies. And they also had something called Om Free for a while, which was also funding studies. It's very confusing. They have many
right.
names for what is largely the same cluster of people.
Mhm.
And if you look at their website where they talk about some of the scientific publications that show, Ohm helps with this or that, it's a little tricky because if you look actually at the studies, each one you'll see that either, I guess last time I checked, it seemed like almost, if not all of them, were either funded by One Taste or the people who are doing it are like One Taste associates who happen to also like want to write the study. So
Yeah.
it's like I didn't see anything that to me seemed truly independent.
Right.
And with like Roland Griffiths, it's like it seems like he gave a talk in which he spoke about his studies on, I believe, psilocybin and mystical experiences, and then suggested that he was like, based on what I know of orgasmic meditation, it seems like it could evoke some of the same mystic experiences that come about in psilocybin. So he is very careful with his language, but of course, if you're just quickly looking at it, you might be like, oh my gosh, Roland
Well,
Griffiths
they put him right on the
endorses oh,
homepage, right? Like,
totally.
I think so there was possible
Yeah.
naivety there about how his brand and the brand of his university was going to be used.
Yeah. I mean, look, these people are great marketers. There's a reason, like orgasmic meditation is a hard thing to pitch. They're good at finding people who are going to give it that stamp of approval. And so like if Roland Griffiths isn't upset about that endorsement, like I guess more power to them. But it does show that that is a clear path by which they are, attempting to bolster some
Yeah.
of their
And
claims
that
and
happens in
some, yeah,
psychedelics a lot as well. I mean, there are kind of psychedelic retreats that have gone to academic researchers to do studies of their retreats, but they're funding it and they're in control of it. And so there's
yeah,
similar kind of questions.
yeah.
Okay, so let's there's some great questions as well from the audience.
Mm,
Did you look, you got to have a strong stomach sometime to report on cults. Um,
yeah.
because you can get really attacked. Did you ever get when the story came out, did they try to undermine or discredit you or
Uh,
threaten you?
yeah, or what was the last thing?
Threaten you?
Oh yeah. Not when the story first came out. They actually, I think their initial reaction was to go quiet and to kind of like hibernate a little bit. But in the last few years, yes, there has been more of an attempt to generally try to push back against some of the public narratives about One Taste. They have put up websites and long blog posts in which they have tried to undercut both, yeah, my reporting integrity and my credibility. Other reporters who have reported on them, they have sued in various ways. Netflix, which did a documentary about One Taste in 2022, which I'm appear in,
Mhm.
and then the BBC, which did a narrative podcast on them a couple years earlier. I believe the BBC case is still proceeding. The Netflix has been, was dismissed, and then there was an appeal, and the appeal was dismissed as well. So there's been like mixed success in that realm, but they have definitely been quite vocal in attacking sort of like individual
Right.
media outlets that have gone after them, myself included. And yeah, I mean, I think it's to be expected. And yeah, I take the legal and like I take it very seriously, my goal to write something that's responsible, and accurate and like something that cannot be maligned in that way, but that doesn't mean that people won't try.
Yeah. Glenn asks, what role did psychedelics play in this dark drama? So obviously she loved her LSD, Nicole, did loads of it, but there wasn't so much, it sounds like, psychedelics in One Taste, but you do describe an amazing episode where a wealthy man wants to leave, and Nicole says, "Sure, but first do LSD with me." Right?
Yeah,
Could you tell
I
us
can
a bit?
explain.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think like, One Taste was for many years, like at least publicly facing, it was like a sober community. There was no drinking, no drugs. I think they understood that when you're dealing with sex, in order to kind of sell it to the public, they needed to have this kind of squeaky clean image. And yet, like if you got in deeper, Nicole would often reference, her time doing lots of acid and LSD, and that was like a formative experience for her.
Mhm.
And then yes, it's true that there were according to my reporting, that there was this episode in which, yeah, allegedly Nicole invited this small, intimate group of people to come do LSD with her, and that one of the people there was this man who had access to family wealth, who had been thinking of leaving One Taste, and and that during this trip, Nicole had gone around and kind of, as people were under the influence, she had allegedly gone around and done various mini scenes with people in which she kind of tried to play a game with them or tried to like get them to some realization. And the one that she allegedly played with him was in which she was encouraging him to like give over more of his resources to the feminine, to support One Taste, to stay. She allegedly said things to him like, "Oh, you can't leave. Like we're your family in this life and the next and the next," and that I think there were other moments earlier in One Taste where she also referenced this idea that like could evoke similar like sort of like brain scrambling as like a strong psychedelics episode. So I think even though it didn't show up in day-to-day life, the
Mm.
influence of it was this idea that Nicole was constantly looking for ways to reframe your sense of reality. It was like she liked to call everything a game. She talked a lot about infinite games. She would talk about, seeing things as not just on the third dimension, but fourth dimensionality, and this idea that there's like another plane by which things are, that's actually where the magic is moving. And as things got, if you got deeper in the company and the longer the company went on, there were some moments where they did, stranger things or took inspiration from like more occult religions. And of course, it's all kind of a mix, but I think there was like the influence, you can sense a little bit of the influence of psychedelics in her life and then echoing through her teachings.
Yeah. Did you ever meet and interview Nicole? Asks Stephanie.
So, for those who get to the end of the book, you'll see that there is a scene toward the very end where I do meet and talk to Nicole for the first time. I had spent at that point, that was in 2023, and at that point I had spent all this time studying her, essentially. And I was very aware that, One Taste knew from the very beginning that I was writing this book. They were actually one of the first people I told when I got the book deal back in 2020. So it was no secret that I was doing this reporting and researching this project. And over the years, I asked for interviews and it was declined. They declined to do that, which is totally their right. And, you know, in its stead, I spoke to many, many people who knew Nicole. I watched hours and hours of videos of her lecturing, listening to her talk, kind of reading writings of hers and things like that. And so I felt like I had this sense of her. So many people had spoken to her of me. I had this like image of her in my head. But then after she was indicted, I actually went to one of their routine court hearings because I happened to be in New York for work. And I entered the courthouse and like, federal courthouse, there's a lot of security. You have to give over your phone and stuff as you wait. And so I had entered and I was waiting in the lobby and I saw her come in with her entourage. And she spots me and she immediately says hi. She calls out to me. She goes, "Hi, Ellen." I was like, "Oh my God." And yeah, she came up to me and we had a very brief conversation in which I introduced myself. I shook her hand and she looks at me and she says, "We have a strange intimacy." And I was like, "Oh my God." I mean, she was right. We do. And I think I knew that she was charming. People had described it to me many times. And then I experienced it in that moment. She kind of knew exactly what to say. And then I was, sort of excused myself. And then we haven't spoken since. I spent a lot of time watching her in the courtroom during the trial. I was in New York and watching the trial most days. And Rachel Cherwitz, her co-defendant, was quite stony in her composure during the trial. Nicole was the opposite. She was very warm. She always talks about her Sicilian heritage. She was like
Mhm.
smiling and moving her hands. If someone entered the courtroom, she would turn around and look at them and put her hands on her heart if she recognized them.
She was
I
holding
spoke to
holding
jurors.
face in the courtroom.
Totally. Even though she can't talk, she's like projecting her energy everywhere and she's very good at it. And
Mhm.
I talked to jurors after the trial was over and they said like, "Oh, we kept noticing Nicole would look at us and like try to make eye contact." And it just, they were a little perturbed by it, but it's, I think indicative of, yeah, she's just someone who like projects her energy very
Right. And she
strongly.
maybe she actually thinks she has kind of magical powers. And I guess with charisma, it can blur into that actually thinking you have occult powers, I guess.
Yeah. Well, charisma, interestingly, one of the cult researchers I spoke to said that she prefers to define charisma as a quality that exists in a relationship between two people rather than a quality that exists in one person,
Yeah.
because that helps you understand why some people might feel so much charisma in the relationship between them and their guru or
Yeah.
them and their teacher. And other people might look at the teacher and be like, "I feel nothing, that it's not landing for me." And I think it would be unfair to dismiss either one of those experiences by suggesting that a single person has universal charisma. In fact, it's much more about like, does it exist in this relationship between two people? And like, that is a definition of that relationship that can help you understand why that person might choose to follow their teacher's advice, maybe against their better interest.
Have you considered interviewing her in prison and doing a kind of, you have this strange intimacy. Like, have you considered doing a follow-up and going, going and doing a series of interviews with her?
Yeah, that's a good question. I have not made the ask, but I certainly could. It's my understanding that she can maybe take phone calls, but I don't know that we could. I have done prison interviews before, but it actually depends on the facility whether you are able to like see the person or do something face to face with the window and things like that. So I'd have to check. I would love to talk to her anytime. I've tried to keep that door open. Somewhat understandably, they have maybe not been so enthusiastic about it, which is fine.
So we have just a kind of 3 minutes left if anyone has any last questions. Um, I've got two. You did a podcast on WeWork. Did you see any parallels between these two organizations?
Yeah, well, I actually did another season of that show more recently that was also about OpenAI and Sam Altman. And so, both of these shows are like narrative seasons, kind of similar to like Serial, one story over the course of many episodes that talk about, yeah, these like major stories in technology and these major characters. The first one's about Adam Newman, and then the other one about Sam Altman. There are definitely parallels. Like in my general reporting on startups in Silicon Valley, it's like you can see the ways that some cult dynamics show up in some of these companies. There's can often be a heightened sense of in-group and out-group. So you might have like shared jargon within a company that makes it clear that like, oh, outsiders don't get us. We are tied together in this way. There's a sense that outsiders like are to be like pitied or sort of shunned. There can be a sense, obviously the sense of like mission, driving people to do their work is like a major organizing force inside these companies. And that's also something that shows up in cult dynamics in general.
Yeah.
Some interesting places in my work where I've seen cult dynamics show up that I didn't expect. Um, More recently, I wrote a story with a colleague about chatbots and the deep and sometimes delusional or even psychotic relationships that humans develop with their chatbots when they spend hours and hours a day talking with ChatGPT or Claude or any of these other services. My colleague and I talked to like, close to 20 different people who had had either these experience themselves or had witnessed it up close. The way that people who really, basically what happens is there are people who spend hours a day chatting with these chatbots and they end up having an experience where they feel like they've made a momentous discovery together. It might be a spiritual discovery, like they're accessing spirit guides through the chatbot, or it might be more STEM focused, like we've made a coding breakthrough, or we've turned the chatbot sentient through our like
Hmm.
AI research. And these people end up, having these um, long-lasting delusions, or in some cases, even being hospitalized for psychosis.
Hmm.
And the parallels are really striking. It's like these people end up naturally getting isolated from their friends and family because they're spending so much time in this relationship with the chatbot. They're not talking to other sources of information. They start trusting the chatbot rather than other sources of information. They feel a sense of special mission and purpose. It feels really alive. There's a sense of emotional validation. And, someone described it to me as a cult of two. It's like you and this entity. And it just underlined for me the way that cults today are not going to look like what you think they are. This was actually probably your first or second question, this idea that, we might have this outdated picture in our heads of a cult leader, like a bearded man on a rural homestead with his followers all wearing the same color clothing. That doesn't exist anymore. And what they might look like now is digital, um, Instagram influencers, YouTube stars, fitness fads, like fast growing companies, a chatbot, AI. Like it's like the human element of cults is not going to change because it's a reflection of how we're wired. It's just like how our brains are made. But the format and the shape of a cult can change dramatically. And if there's one hallmark quality of a cult over the decades is that they change to reflect our current society. So I really feel like one of the smartest ways that you can look at cult dynamics is by recognizing that the dynamics will stay, but the shape of it is going to change. And you need to be open to the idea that a cult could look like something really different. In this case, maybe like a relationship with a chatbot. Like, who would have thought 5 or 10 years ago that that could be a
Yeah.
way that people experience cult dynamics? Well, I think it's happening now.
Yeah. Ellen, you've done brilliantly, really good interviewee. Thank you so much for your kind of concise eloquent answers. Just lastly, I mean, I'm particularly interested in psychedelics, and Silicon Valley and Silicon Valley founders. And I know that Adam Newman was very into psychedelics. I hear he kind of, would pay a fortune for like smoke 5-MeO DMT. And Sam Altman has invested in psychedelics. So I was just curious, do you come across that in your kind of, Silicon Valley reporting? And how does that play out? I mean, does it feed into kind of the ego inflation of these incredibly wealthy founders, or what do you see? Or maybe it's become passé. I'm just curious on your thoughts on psychedelics in Silicon Valley and the Bay Area.
Yeah, I did not have not heard about Adam Newman and 5-MeO DMT, but look, I'll let you take that. I mean, I know he smoked a lot of marijuana. That's like pretty well
Right.
known. I think yes, it's funny because I think for a general audience, every once in a while there'll be a story that's like Elon Musk has done ketamine, and it's like, well, that doesn't, for a certain crowd, that actually doesn't sound that surprising. But I think you're right that beyond that, just living in the Bay Area in the circles that I am in and like understanding um, kind of the culture here and covering it professionally as well. It's like, yes, for sure. Like not, certainly not every founder is doing this, but I think the truth is it is very much in the water here. The idea that psychedelics of all stripes can help you unlock some sort of visionary thinking, that it can help you tap into creativity. These are the promises that then lead, I think, and there's also that it's like socially reinforced and approved of it within certain circles. It's definitely like something that people try to keep private, but I am never surprised when I hear about a Silicon Valley founder who has turned to psychedelics as a way of inspiration or even doing it in group settings with maybe like trusted inner circles within a company. I think, you know, it could lead to like grandiose thinking, whether that could end up being helpful and innovative or
Yeah.
like damaging and like ego inflating, or some mix of the two. And it's certainly not, unique to founders. It's a reflection of the current culture around psychedelics, like in the Valley and in a place where professional aspirations are a big part of your personal aspirations. You know what I mean? Like, and in fact, for many founders, they are one and the same. So this idea that you would do something to sort of change yourself in order to like improve your company or improve your leadership, like there's no separation.
And it seems a little competitive in terms of their self-optimization as well.
Yeah.
Um,
Let's answer this last question,
so,
which I think was
uh,
bumped up from Ida.
I lost a few friends from this cult. Do you have a sense of how the members are handling the conviction and the press, as in the media?
Hmm.
I'm wondering if and how to reach back out to people who are heavily involved. Thank you.
That's a tough question. And yeah, you have my compassion on behalf of your experience and your friends as well. It's complicated. I think for the sense that I've gotten from being at the trial, covering the trial, just like observing all of this and I will see like reactions from those who are still pretty clearly like in and quite devoted to OneTaste. I have not, publicly, like, and I'm talking about them posting on forums and certain things that like trickle down to me. It's like they're definitely um, standing their ground and having a sense that the conviction, the narrative that I have gathered from those who are still devoted to OneTaste is that the conviction is, a miscarriage of justice, that it is an example of prosecutorial overreach or maybe even a threat to religious freedom, and that it in no way suggests that what happened at OneTaste was wrong or criminal in any sense. And so I think I have seen in general a doubling down. And speaking from my experience as, I was covering this story, my first story on OneTaste was 7 years ago. And so I have actually seen over the course of those 7 years, some people who were like pretty staunchly in when I started reporting. Maybe a couple years later, they reach out to me and they're like, actually, I've come to realize like maybe through your reporting, or that was something that unlocked something for me. And then I did my own processing. And so there are people who have reached out to me who were like in when I first wrote that story, who are now more out. it does happen. I think it's hard to know with individuals whether they might be processing privately. Um, in general, I think like if you're trying to support someone, like you can just say like I'm here if you ever want to talk. But the truth is, I think it is it's not my expertise to know when or how. And I have also seen people go back and forth. So it's not even necessarily like there's a lot of people who are still kind of like in between. Like they might feel devotion and loyalty and gratitude to Nicole, understandably, because she had a big impact on their life. And they might also be questioning certain parts of the group. And it's not like it's a one-way street. They could float a little bit here for a while and then float back. And there are also some people who have expressed to me that they were initially happy that there was public exposure of some of these allegations about OneTaste, but then they felt that the criminal charges went too far and that those were, that has, evoked some sympathy, like for it's very complicated. So it's not just one thing. And yeah, I'm glad that that could be helpful information.
So I just see that Nicole's bringing out a new book next month about kind of enlightenment in prison.
She,
So
there are some
the
books.
next phase is she's already.
Look, if that book becomes available, I'll definitely order it. But there have also been books that they have talked about and made like landing pages for that, as far as I know, have not appeared. So it's a mix.
Well,
I'll be keeping an eye out for that.
your book is out and it was fantastic. So well done.
Thank you.
I very much recommend reading
Yes,
it.
Empire of Orgasm, everyone.
It's a really interesting
Thank
book.
you so much for having me and for listening, everyone. I appreciate the thoughtful questions.
Great. Thank you very much for joining us, Ellen. Okay, bye everybody. See you next time. Thank you, Ellen.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.